Live from the Washington, D.C. area, all empowered citizens need to know about intelligent use of resources, smart governance, inclusive communities, smart industry, and healthy, thriving urbanization. This is Smart Sustainability, the TV talk about shaping a sustainable future in the digital age with Nicolette DeVidar. How can we handle increasing climate disasters and self-organize better to help each other when disaster strikes? Our topic tonight. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Nicolette DeVidar. The growing climate disasters, like the recent ones with flooding in Louisiana and in New York, or not too long ago, the historic flood that hit Germany's Ahr Valley, wildfires in California, and other places, are stark reminders that the weather can strike at any time and anywhere. We've all been shown that in today's world, we need a different level of preparedness, a different way for real-time information when the disaster strikes, and a different way for citizens to become more proactive and help each other so that we can feel more secure, better equipped, more resilient, less reactive, and more in charge. What this new world of neighbors helping neighbors when disaster strikes can look like, and what faith communities have to do with getting involved in climate action is what we talk about tonight. Joining us here in the studio is Andrea McGimsey. She's Executive Director of the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions in Northern Virginia. We have joining us on Zoom Meens Palanippian, founder and CEO of Atma Connect, an award-winning technology that deploys a social network for neighbors helping neighbors. AtmaGo, as this tool is called, has reached over 7 million people in Puerto Rico and Indonesia to prepare for disasters. We have Erika Marrero. She's the Puerto Rico Program Manager for Atma Connect. And we have Karen Robbins, a lawyer and advisor of collaboration and systems change initiatives. Welcome all of you on Smart Sustainability. Great to have you on. I want to start with Meens right away. Meens, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Let's go. So you founded Atma Connect with the goal of helping communities, so neighbors helping neighbors, so to speak. Tell us a little bit about Atma Connect and why did you get into that?
So there are a lot of reasons why, but I think just like framing it in sort of the moment that we're in right now, where we see all around us disasters are increasing. Over the last 30 years, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the United States looked back over the last few decades and found that billion-dollar disasters were increasing rapidly. And it was $1.8 trillion of damages from these disasters. And there are people that are on the front lines whose homes are flooded, whose homes are burning down, and these people need a way to connect with each other, to help each other in the time of disaster. So they need a way to be prepared. They need to get early warnings about disaster so that they are able to move valuables, they're able to evacuate, they're able to warn their neighbors. They need information about where to go for food and shelter and water in the hours after disaster. And what is really needed is a way for them to organize, to not only rebuild, but to prevent the next disaster by planting mangrove trees, restoring coastlines and shorelines, so to prevent flooding. And taking those steps towards preventing the next disaster is actually building their momentum and agency to address root causes of disaster. They're organizing together to hold governments accountable for the changes that are needed to really mitigate and address climate change and affect and improve lives for the most vulnerable communities.
Erika, you are in Puerto Rico. In fact, you're joining us from Puerto Rico, so to speak. Give us, I mean, it's an island, obviously. You're very much right in the middle of it. Tell us a little bit in terms of your experience. Why do we need better information? Has this occurred to you in the past? If so, how would it have made a difference if we had such a tool already earlier?
Well, I can talk about the example that was more recent in terms of failure in a way of communicate, not failure, but rather difficulties in communication. And that was Hurricane Maria in 2017. So from my experience, when the hurricane hit, you would see people in the streets like holding up their phones in the middle of the streets or highways even, trying to reach for a signal so that they were able to communicate with others. So they would usually use social media. And these platforms, not all of them, but you can find that sometimes platforms in the internet tend to be heavy in terms of data and information. So AtmaGo would have been, at that moment, it was not yet there in Puerto Rico, but now it is. So imagine that you are standing in the middle of the street, trying to reach for a signal so that maybe you have family in the other side of the island or quite close, but it's really hard to reach because of all the debris and all the fallen trees. Or maybe they're in the US, for example. So if we have had Atma Connect at the time, AtmaGo, sorry, at the time, this platform does not require so much data. So it would have been so much easier if you, who were standing in the middle of the highway, trying to reach for a signal so that you can get into a messaging system or a social media, well, AtmaGo would have been a really useful tool because it does not require so much data.
So it loads faster.
Yes.
And it's locally organized. So part of, on Facebook, you're connected with your friends all over the world. And yet disaster really affects you in your place, and it's affecting your neighbors. And before governments are able to respond, before Red Cross and humanitarian agencies show up, it's really your neighbors that can help you find food and water and help save vulnerable people who are disabled and elderly people who need to be evacuated. So when you come onto AtmaGo, you get a local feed of what it is people are sharing in local communities. It could be about jobs, entrepreneurship, COVID vaccination sites. And because people are able to use it daily for their daily needs and trust the information on AtmaGo, so people trust, 81% of people who use AtmaGo trust the information there versus the kind of trust they have for other social media platforms. Because you trust that information, it becomes all the more powerful in disaster, in those hours after disaster when you need basic needs, and in the months after disaster when you're rebuilding and really working to prevent the next disaster.
So Karen, you work as an advisor for change systems initiatives. Can you explain to us a little bit sort of like where's the current connect and how we react? How do we get information? How do we react to things? And where is the disconnect?
Yes, Nicolette, first I want to say that I live in a high fire danger area, and I personally have evacuated from my home 3 years in a row. So this is very much a personal experience for me. And I can really say that it was neighbors informing each other and helping each other that made the difference. So with AtmaGo, it's the kind of platform that we need. It allows people to use the new tools that we have to do things that we just couldn't do before. I can't even imagine what it would be like if we couldn't connect with each other with real-time information. These are the kinds of things that now we're able to do. And the incredible opportunity here is to be able to use the network of people connecting with each other, sharing real-time information so that we all are smarter.
Now, but that does depend also on our electricity access, right? So I think that's the one vulnerability that we all still have. Because I know, for example, when they had the big flooding in Germany in the Ahr Valley this summer, part of the reason why there was no warning, why people got really out cold, was that we all have cell phones now. And the problem with cell phones was that you just didn't have the signal anymore. And there were many who said afterwards, they said, well, if we still would have had the landlines, we could have actually saved more people and would have reacted a little faster.
Yeah, that's a great question, Nicolette. And the reality is, you're right. The mobile phone technology is leapfrogged over landlines. So all over the world, people that didn't have landlines now have mobile phones, and yet it is a technology that's really vulnerable to disaster. Telecom lines come down, electricity lines come down. And so what we really need to think about this as is a tool that's really building over the long-term social cohesion, right? It's building the social fabric so that you know your neighbors. You're working with your neighbors on a weekly, on a daily basis to build resilience to the next disaster. It's really, so for example, in places where we work, people will gather every week to do neighborhood cleanups or mangrove plantings or work in the local garden. And it's really about those relationships that give you the ability to respond and recover from disaster. And in fact, there are countless academic studies after Hurricane Sandy, after the heat wave in Chicago, that found that communities with better social connections, where there were good social networks, actually experienced less mortality and morbidity in disaster. And so this is a tremendous finding. It is a silver bullet in disaster that we need to take advantage of as we, as humanity, are facing rising disasters. And I think what we've seen with technology so far is that it's creating a lot of divisiveness. People are finding all of the reasons that they disagree. There are echo chambers. There's hate and fear spread faster online. So we really need to create online communities that promote pro-social behaviors, that are building the fabric of society rather than fraying the fabric of society, because it is this social safety net, these connections are the ones that are going to get you through disaster.
That's right, and that actually is a great lead-in for you also, Andrea, because when we talk about neighborhoods, when we talk about building relationships, when we talk about going out and getting together, is this where the connection point is between the faith communities and the climate? Because it hits home, but also in general, are we at a point where we discover that really loving your neighbor is also survival?
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. The faith communities have the networks on the ground, and the love and kindness towards each other is already existing. I will say, I want to tell you about a project we're working on because it just came up in this conversation, the vulnerability of electricity. This is an example where these two come together, what the reality on the ground and using these kind of apps, social media apps. We have a project called Solar Sanctuaries, and we're working with African American churches to get solar and battery backup systems so that literally the church can become a sanctuary where people can come and charge their phones and have air conditioning or have heat, be able to cook food, things like that, those basic things you need power to do, because we're seeing more and more power outages, and that is a vulnerability. But bringing the social media, I'm really excited to work with Mina and her team because we have the network literally on the ground. And then if we can build it and make it even stronger with this app, I think it's gonna make us much more resilient.
Yeah, because I think when you think about this, you know, people, when you think back hundreds of years ago, but the church, basically the churches were kind of the first places of shelter people would turn to, right? So we've, over time, we've lost that a little bit, and I think we are maybe rediscovering that that's sort of out there.
Yeah, and I think in a community that's as big as Fairfax County, we have over 1 million people here. And so any one church, I mean, the people are scattered around the county, though they tend to go to their faith community that's close by.
Yeah.
But you really need more of the interaction. And we're going to see more and more disasters here. If the storm a couple weeks ago had just come a little farther south, we would have seen the kind of flooding of our basements and just, I mean, so much rain fell in such a short amount of time that it caused flooding where you'd never think it was going to happen. You don't have to be right by a river or a stream for it to happen when you have that kind of rainfall. And so having those connections and knowing, you know, so for example, my mother is 85, and knowing that people know where she lives besides me, because what if I'm out of town or, you know, can't get to her, but neighbors that live from church who live closer to her can reach out. So, and then tell me maybe over the app that she's okay. That's going to be critical, those kind of resilience measures.
Yeah, let's talk about this for a moment. Meena, when we imagine, how do we imagine this app to function? So let's use this example, for example, that Andrea just mentioned. So there is a heavy rain. Usually, yes, you can hear it on the weather, but sometimes you cannot, and really just sort of like it hits you when you only have like a few minutes or a few seconds. Walk us through the process, like how would that actually work? So obviously people have to get to the app first, but then how does this play out?
Yeah, so where possible, where we have the government connections, we're able to deliver an early warning to your mobile phone. So you would have the app on your phone because it's a way that you keep connected to your neighbors and know what's happening in your community. And you would be notified that there's a warning of heavy rainfall that your local government has published, or there are a lot of neighbors around you that are reporting this. So it'll take you to the app and give you a set of things that you can do. It'll give you information about what to do to protect your house at this time, where you can go, where a local flooding shelter is, and routes for evacuation. So we have examples of how this has been used in Indonesia through the entire cycle. So people are getting an early warning on their phones. They're sharing information with each other about safe streets, photos of roads and pathways out of communities that are flooded. And in the hours and days after disaster, helping each other find where to shelter, where to get health care. And in the days after disaster, organizing neighborhood cleanup events. So this is, tremendous. A lot of times the news is there right when the disaster happens, but in the months after, there's so much debris and things that need to be cleaned up. And so sort of organizing these neighborhood cleanup events. And then what I'm really excited about with Andrea and Faith for Climate Solutions is the way that really we're taking all of this energy, this felt experience of climate, how it's affected me, my family, my neighborhood, and taking that into advocating to address the root causes of these issues. And what we're seeing happen all over the world and in Puerto Rico is how we can organize to take collective action to hold governments accountable and to request and demand those changes to invest in climate mitigation and adaptation.
Now that brings up a really important point, because we've seen, and I think we've seen that here as well, that the weather becomes much more occurring in certain pockets. So for example, it can rain really badly in one area and just 10 miles down the road there is none, right? So when you look at the app, is that then always dependent on local government to put in the information, or can any citizen who's using the app put information in?
Yes, any citizen. So this is crowdsourced information. It's crowdsourced information. And when it is coming from a government authority, it can be called an early warning. When your neighbors are reporting it, it's a hazard that we're going to alert you about. If there are a number of reports of the same thing, that's a hazard. That, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, because I would think
we're-
that when you have these different weather patterns and when it really comes down sometimes to 1 mile difference, you can go, I've experienced this here, where in one area it was really bad thunderstorms and raining and flooding, and just 1 mile down the road was absolutely nothing.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. And even being able to create early warning systems where upstream communities that are affected can say, oh, so this is going to be coming to you in a half an hour or 45 minutes. I mean, to really get far better at those systems of early warning. And the good news is, you know, despite the tremendous growing losses from disaster, financially and in terms of people displaced, we have gotten better at saving lives. And that is something that I think that we really need to celebrate, is that early warning systems have proven effective and they are working.
Yeah.
Now we need to take that same level of coordination and energy and use it to build more resilient systems.
Now,
Nicolette,
Eric,
can I
Yeah,
add
sure,
that
sure.
I think that there's an advantage in having a single platform that we can all communicate on, because what happens in a disaster scenario is that a lot of people want to rush in to provide help, but there's not a lot of coordination, there's not a lot of time for coordination, and if they don't have a common platform to understand what's happening, you can have people, for example, bringing water to a place where it's not needed. So there's a lot of advantage in having a single location, and this is part of collaboration. If you have a joint space in which people can come on quickly, trust each other, and they know that this isn't a place to flame or chat nonsense. This is important stuff. Then people can use it for the right reasons, and organizations and individuals can collaborate and coordinate.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it also, when you think about, it increases really the ability for all of us to self-organize in the communities. The water is a great example, for
That's
example, or you have other things. Sometimes, when you can be in food shortages, when you are in areas where at some point, there is a hurricane or really bad weather, or even worse, like real flooding, and you're suddenly cut off from everything else. You can run into food shortages despite our technologies, despite our military efforts, despite our air bridges and things like that, but it happens. And I think we've all become more sensitive to it right now, right? So to have a platform where people can really write about these things, I think this is great. Now, one question though, how would we prevent people who panic or would hoard in that instance? So I could actually see that you may have circumstances, let's say there is a water shortage or something. I could see that some people would have a tendency out of panic. So I'm not saying this in a way that, some people, and there are some people who just want to really take advantage of that too. I mean, let's be real, it does exist. They would hoard some water and then see, how can they make a buck of someone else. But then there are also some who are just panicking and think we have a larger families or things like that. How would we balance that approach? Like, you have a completely transparent portal, you have information there, but you would still depend on the judgment of everyone, so to speak, not being too panicky, not being hoarding, not being selfish, but think of the larger community. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll start on this. And I really think that we can create better online spaces and offline spaces because they feed off of each other. And part of, I'll say, our tagline, neighbors helping neighbors. This is not the private social network for your neighborhood, which is sort of the tagline of another app. It's fundamental in that message and in the marketing and in the resilience activities that we help support, is that really it's about this fundamental concept of mutual support. It is that we care for one another. And yes, there are always going to be bad actors, but there's an opportunity and a space to kind of recognize that there's a lot of good in humanity. And, when you see, there's this journalist, Darren Kagan, that said, in all of these disasters, you see tremendous suffering. Bad things do happen in the world. But out of these situations always arise stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And that is what we see all the time on AtmaGo. And it's after disaster, when people are offering up their homes for people for emergency personnel to stay in, when they're looking for where to find water and someone helps them out. These are ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And I think that is really this, that's what we're focusing on. We're focusing on this brilliance and this light that exists in every single person, and spreading it. And that's really fundamentally, I think what's so exciting about the faith community getting involved in this too, is that that's really what faith is about, is that humanity can be good, and disasters present this tremendous challenge, and in it we see people rising to it in incredible ways. And on this the food issue that you brought up, I think that's a really great one, Nicolette, and wanted to say that absolutely happened after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, and it was 85% of food is imported into Puerto Rico. And so what's been so exciting to see on AtmaGo post since we've been working in Puerto Rico is the number of people that are organizing together to provide food security. And would love to have Erika talk a little bit about that, which I think is an incredible example of people rising to the challenge.
Yeah, Erika, go.
Thank you, Mina. So to put an example, there is this community in Arecibo, which is the northern coast of Puerto Rico. They're called Garrochales Produce. Garrochales is the name of the community, and Produce is produces in that sense. So this organization, this community started out as a place or an organization that would work on rebuilding the history of their community, Garrochales. And in doing so, as they went into the houses of the elderly people and the people that had the memory of the past as they lived it, they started. This was Garrochales Clásico, a previous group that is Produce is contained within Garrochales Clásico. So as they did interviews to their people, they realized that some of these people had needs, and they organized themselves like, hey, we're going to the houses, we're talking with the people, why don't we also help them get what they need? Sometimes it was medicine, sometimes it was food, sometimes it was appointments. As the COVID pandemic struck, their community fear was that because almost everything is imported, suddenly they could be facing a famine. So what they did is that they organized themselves within the group to create a whole new focus only directed towards the production of chickens, or eggs and chickens, meat, and also of vegetables. They contacted various people that lived in Garrochales before, and then they had studied agriculture here in Puerto Rico and had programs in the University of Florida, if I am not mistaken. And through workshops, they created a whole team of citizens ready to grow their food and ready to grow their chickens and their eggs. So right now they are a collective of family gardens, but they are working towards creating a community garden right now. So this is Garrochales Produce. Other movements have also been working on like that in Puerto Rico. Puerta de Tierra has also another one, community garden that was tended by children, actually, mostly children.
That's fantastic.
The elderly people had the knowledge and the children had the energy. So.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's fantastic. Those are really great examples. Okay, let's shift gears here for a moment, Andrea. So when we hear that, the community gardens, when we hear about how people can better organize themselves, when we hear about how do we tie in the consciousness of people, the faith part, so to speak, in all of these efforts, where does the alliance, the Faith Alliance fit in there? Where do you start in this whole process?
Well, I think as climate change continues to get worse and worse, which is what the science tells us is going to happen, and we need to deal with that, and we need to start organizing, by the way, on mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. But as we react to what's happening, we're going to need to have stronger and stronger human networks where we're really looking out for each other in a really kind of radical humanitarian way, and thinking about, you know, our neighbors, our family, and all of us just more interconnected. And what I think is exciting about using this online opportunity that's not Twitter. By the way, I love Twitter, but when you have hashtag Caldor Fire, I mean, everything under the sun is getting, you know, tweeted about that.
Yeah, it's more like a one-way. It's more like a one-way tweeting out versus actually really tying into something, right?
Yeah, but you can see within those threads people really trying to connect and share vital information that's going to save lives.
Yeah.
So it's exciting to think of a very intentional online app, you know, where you are really intentionally building those networks now, so that when those disasters happen, they can be activated, and, you know, you have a much stronger social fabric. And so connecting it with the thing that's amazing about faith community, so many people belong to faith community. I think Mina told me it's 70%. That's a huge number of our citizens. And to be able to tap into those already existing networks and then make them even stronger, that's what we're going to have to do. We have to really, really get stronger human networks going so that we're strong when these things happen.
Yeah. Now, two questions for you, Andrea. You mentioned we need to have a radical humanitarian approach. Tell us the difference between what you would see was the humanitarian approach until now and what's the radical part of it.
Well, I mean, honestly, the reason I used radical is because what's coming our way is pretty radical. It's not what we've dealt with in the past.
Right.
Things are going to be harder, and, you know, unfortunately, more people are going to be harmed and more people are going to die. And so we really need to step up our efforts to really be there for each other. And the thing about local people, like, we know where the river is, we know where the creek is, we know where the neighborhood of the elderly is, you know, we know where the little baby is, and maybe the mom with 2 toddlers and a baby who might just really need more help than, say, me living by myself with my cats, you know. But you need, you know, at that local level, you have that deep knowledge. And if we can tap into that and help people strengthen, you know, educate them, get them connected, and know where the resources are. By the way, I wanted to say I'm a former local elected official, and local government wants to help, right? I mean, that is what they are there for, but it's hard. Government doesn't have that deep knowledge of the community the way like a faith community would. So anyway, I'm really excited to the radical humanitarian, you know, that's what I mean by that. Not anything crazy. It's like really deep love and caring for each other, which is, by the way, a central tenet of so many different faiths. I mean, pretty much every faith community.
Yeah, it's
loving and caring.
And we really are on that evolution, so to speak, on that track. When you look at how consciousness rises, when you look at that, we realize that faith, it's about faith. It's not about dogma. It's about coming together. It's about, you know, the spiritual evolution and a more understanding of the concept of love, what that means in a broader sense. So I definitely think that's where it comes together. My second question for you, though, is how much are people already involved in climate action? What's the general understanding? Do you still see a lot of education that's necessary in that sense? Or do you have people who literally like knock on the door and say, yes, we want to be part of this?
Oh, people are ready now.
Yeah.
And the research shows that there's deep understanding and deep concern, especially in Northern Virginia. I mean, we know this is happening. We've accepted the science and we're ready to start reacting to it and getting going. So yeah, people are hungry and they want to, honestly, what's happening can be very depressing and make you just want to kind of give up. But what makes people okay is when they can take action and when you give them things that they can do. And so, first of all, making sure that things aren't getting worse. So we need to be cutting greenhouse gas emissions, and places like Fairfax County are really starting to tackle that. And our elected leaders need to hear from us, and this app can help with that.
And getting a handle on the trash and the plastics.
Oh, yes. By the way, there's a plastic bag tax that's being voted on September 14th by the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. So if you care about plastic bags and lessening the plastic trash, now's the time to speak up. And by the way, if we were all connected with this app, we would be sending it out, hey, there's this really important vote happening. Here's how you can make your voice heard on it.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about, we spoke a little bit about laying the groundwork for building a better infrastructure. So we know, we've heard a little bit about the acceptance that I think, in some areas of the world, the acceptance is already there. In some others, I think the acceptance of how the weather is changing, it doesn't matter whether you believe in climate change or not, but I think everyone at this point has realized that the weather patterns have changed for whatever reason, but they've changed. So we know there's climate disasters, we know we have to be better prepared. What are all the different elements we would have to connect and build together to be better prepared, to have communities that when something strikes, we know we need to look for the food, we need to look for the water, we need to, how would we go about that? Karen, you want to take that?
Nicolette, I think that there's so much intelligence in people. And they don't have to be professional disaster managers or planners. There's a lot of intelligence about how to prepare and what's necessary. And in a sense, when I look at a place like, let's say, Home Depot, the do-it-yourself movement, we've all learned that there's a tremendous opportunity for people to do it themselves. They need a place, though, where they can communicate with each other to get more knowledgeable, to organize, to let each other know what the kind of preparation is that's necessary. And tools can drive behavior. That's why something like AtmaGo is so valuable, because it actually gives people a way to connect and share the information they have. So if you want to decide that you're going to come together, for example, in my neck of the world, which is the western part of the United States, where we're just being devastated by fires, neighbors have to clear their properties, they have to know the defensible space, they need to learn from each other. And we can do that. We don't have to always depend on government. I think we're learning that we can't depend on government at the local, regional, state, national levels. They just can't do everything. So we're going to have to step up. And that means that everybody's going to have to be a change maker now to make things better.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question. I think if we've seen anything right now in the world is that we all need to come together and self-organize. And actually, if you look at how people self-organize, what we see is that we do much better self-organizing than any involvement in government could actually ever do. I mean, that's a fact.
At times.
That's a fact. The question is, how do we do this in an efficient, in an effective, in a way that really lets everyone participate, starts for people to trust in that and kind of move forward. Yes, I know we say we can go to the app, but I want to talk a little bit more about what are key things people need to think about to be prepared and to feel a little bit in charge. So not quite like so ready for the next weather storm to just wipe you off the balcony. Who wants to go?
I can go with that. So I think you need to think through what you might be faced with if disaster hits and you need to suddenly leave. So for instance, you need to have ready to go clothing and medication and water and have it packed up, and so you can grab it and take your family and go.
So the escape bag, we all need to go back to having an escape bag.
Yeah. And I still don't have one myself, so I need to go home and I need to do that.
I actually do have one.
Good for you. Yeah. And then, you know, having a plan for those we love and maybe our elderly friends or those friends with those really young children, and plans for how to help them depending on, you know, what the disaster is that could hit you. Yeah. Like, and by the way, what disasters are going to hit, that's changing. So most people don't know this, but the most wildfires in our country happen in the southeast. People think it's in the west. In the west, there's less fires, they're just gigantic, but we're going to see more and more fires here. And so what would you do if suddenly in Fairfax County we had a big fire in some of the woods we're having? You know, you have to think through kind of beyond maybe what you've dealt with in the past. I mean, so far, my roof has blown off twice in 2 different houses.
Here?
Yeah, here. And these weren't hurricanes. One of them was a nor'easter that just randomly hit, and half the roofs in Loudoun County had tarps on them. Yeah. So having a tarp ready to, you know, get up on your roof and you know, keep the rain out. These are the kind of things we're going to have to think through, and be ready, because, you know, there's going to be a shortage of tarps in a time like that. So get one earlier than later.
Have a full gas tank all the time, right?
Yes, you want to have your batteries charged.
Yes.
And if you see a storm's coming, make sure all your devices are fully charged. And by the way, with electric cars, we're going to have more and more battery storage at home. And that's a good thing. Like when Texas went through that terrible time with the freezing, the people who had batteries in their electric car, those were lifesavers, literally. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone wants to add something?
I would like to add that there's also a factor of consciousness. We have to grow a more collective consciousness. Stop thinking individually. Stop thinking about me, myself, and I, and start thinking these things that happen maybe to me can also happen to the neighbor. Or what are the things, now that you know your neighbor, what are the things that you could see are a limit to that person? Yeah. So also, yes, there is this thing, for example, about get a tarp, you know, as Andrea mentioned. It's a prepare yourself before, but also there is the thing of, if you know that these things are happening, build better houses. Or not that the houses are bad built, but that they are not built to sustain these winds, for example. So if you see the winds that are starting to come, you're able also to think forward, be proactive in this. These things are happening. How can I make my building also better to prevent damage to my house, to my family, therefore?
Those are good points. So when you look at preparedness in Puerto Rico, Erika, and you mentioned a little bit so that you've taken some lessons learned. So we've seen people growing food together. We've seen there's sort of a network evolving out of this. Have you seen anything else? Like if you had to sum up, how has preparedness in Puerto Rico, for example, improved since, you know, the last year or two? What did you see? How would you summarize that?
I can say for once that the blow of the hurricane sort of put us into perspective. It made us vulnerable, and vulnerability opened us doors to think of solutions that we would have otherwise not thought about. I can say, for example, in a more personal point of view, there was a leakage in my house, and I had to construct canals because I did not know how to put together cement to cover the hole. Mm-hmm. So in general, I learned later. In general, the whole island has created better bonds. Neighbors started going out and talk to their neighbors. Trees were fallen, so people that had a saw, motor saw, yeah. Suddenly you would have a neighbor that said, "Oh, I have this. I can go and clear the fallen tree." And I'm putting that heroic example because it's probably the most graphic one. Yeah. But it happened 3 years ago, and these things you can still see them today. It's just that it's not as graphic as I put it here.
Yeah,
yes,
that's right. I always find that even when you had like a heavy snowstorm or something like this, it really usually brought out the best in people afterwards. And for me, actually, the best example in how people can collaborate is when you look at traffic lights after a storm. I've noticed that in most cases, traffic actually works better when there are not traffic lights and people sort of have to coordinate with each other than if we have the lights and the rules and people just trust that, that they're there and they follow them, but they do not use common sense in terms of does it really make sense and what's the best way of sort of making it work. So I think to me that's always been a really good example to see that collaboration works better when you're a little bit open to the unexpected.
And everyone's going through the same thing, so you're more empathic. You're more conscious, you're more thinking about the collective and providing solutions so that the traffic can run, for example.
That's right.
For the collective.
Yeah, and going with the flow, yes.
Nicolette, I wanted to tell a story about Puerto Rico that has come here to Northern Virginia. They were without power, many of the communities, for months. Mm-hmm. And so there's this wonderful captain from Las Vegas who got together with a solar company in America, and they brought these solar and battery backup systems to the fire stations in Puerto Rico so that at least the first responders could have their communication systems back and be able to get to people. So that's actually what inspired the solar sanctuary idea and building, the idea of resilience hubs has been around for a while. It's a sustainability directors network. They have wonderful guidance about this. But it was what happened in Puerto Rico and those solutions that were created there that are now inspiring Northern Virginia. So that's the kind of sharing I think we'll have to do as these things happen and people come up with innovative ways to be more resilient. Then we need to spread that knowledge and we need to get those solutions on the ground, and it will save a lot of lives.
Absolutely. Mina, how does AtmaGo tie first responders in?
So we, first responders in Indonesia, for example, do use the app. Red Cross, which is an arm of the government there, uses AtmaGo to share information about centers that they've set up and where there's water available. So we have a lot of partnerships with humanitarian organizations like Red Cross and Mercy Corps who really see that this is sort of the next layer. And the way that we talk about it is that there are first responders and then there are, next responders. It's basically, these are the folks that are there even before the first responders. And so they really see the value of social connection as really the first line of defense in responding to disaster. And I think, something that you said earlier about, planning for the unexpected, that's fundamentally what resilience is. What climate change has unleashed in the world and in our country is is an uncertain future, right? So all of the infrastructure we've built, is meant for 100-year floods or things like that, and now these are occurring more often. And so, what we're really building here is this ground up sort of engagement with what is occurring, and it's a historic opportunity right now because we have the Conference of Parties, right? The UN Climate Summit that's coming up in November. We have the Pope and several prominent religious leaders really sounding the call that we're in a climate emergency, that poor and vulnerable people are suffering the most in this climate emergency, and calling on people of faith, people of goodwill to take action to help their neighbors and also to protect our common home. So we have this historic opportunity, and what we need, what honestly heads of government need is people to come together and rise up and say, this is the future that we want to build together. A future that is equitable, that is fair, where people are safe and secure, and where we've built resilience to disaster together.
I'm going to challenge this in one respect, though. I think that we always want security on things, but when we talk about faith, I think we're all learning more and more that the faith plays an essential part. The self, the consciousness, the development, the believing in your inner world, so to speak, has also a lot to do with the fact that how we can handle, how we can prepare, how we can manage that. And I think sometimes a lot of people get a little bit carried away when they want like a solution, that takes care of it, and they just have like a certain technology or a house or a bunker, and then they think they're safe in there, when reality is that really we're finding out more and more that what you can really rely on most above all is your inner self. You have to the self to your connection to a higher power, to something that really keeps you through, right?
Yeah, and I would add that connection with other people's higher selves, and that profound network of love and kindness towards each other.
Yeah, seeing the
is going to be needed more than ever.
Exactly.
And so like the Pope's call for us to come together and to care for those who are the most vulnerable, I just pray that everyone does that more than ever.
Yeah, so the feeling secure has to come with the fact that, yes, we have the right tools, but we also have the faith within and the ability within, or the belief, the knowledge of your own ability that you can actually tackle that. We have about 4 minutes left, so I want to talk a little bit more about, Meena, where is the AtmaGo right now deployed? Where is it available? And what are plans for going forward?
Yeah, so AtmaGo right now, we're a nonprofit organization, and we depend on grant funding and partnerships with humanitarian agencies to deploy the app. And so we've reached 7 million people in Indonesia and now Puerto Rico. We are eager to make this globally available, excited to work with large partners to make that happen. And what we've been really excited about working with Faith for Climate Solutions on is really another transformative platform, which is a way to bring together billions of people around the world, hundreds of millions of people in the United States, to take climate action and to have that be measurable, aggregated, that we're building this sense of connection and belonging online, so that people go from a feeling of despair around climate change to being a change maker. And I think that that's really a fundamental skill. Sort of, Nicolette, as you were talking about this idea of security, I was thinking about like being a surfer on a surfboard. That's what we want people to be doing, is being an active player in navigating the surf that is coming. And I think that is those connections, that individual agency to make change is what's going to be needed at this critical moment in time. And we're really excited about building this collective climate action platform that is building resilience and really stopping climate change in its tracks.
Yeah. So let's talk a few. We got 2 minutes left. We have to make it really quick. What are some key lessons learned from preparedness that you've worked with, for example, Erika in Puerto Rico, and Mina, you can say that, well, or Karen for you in the wildfire. But it's got to be quick, so let's go.
You go first, Erika.
Any key? Let's go. You can go first, Mina. What are key lessons in terms of preparedness that have you experienced, since you've been working with AtmaGo?
Yeah, I think that, one of the key things is know your neighbors and, understand. I think it's just an incredibly powerful thing. It's make those connections. Think about safe routes out of the community. Think about your neighbors who need help and assistance, and be active. Be an active participant in creating a more sustainable, resilient place to live. Mm-hmm.
Karen, you got something to add?
I would say we can't be passive. We really have to take responsibility for ourselves, for our communities.
Yeah. Erika, you?
It is the social networking between peers, between neighbors, definitely. Without that, there's no way you can know what's going on, and there's no way you can help others, and there's no way anyone can help you because there is no communication. So the basic communication and networking among your peers, neighbors.
All right, any final word for you, Andrea? What do you want the audience to know? Other than being ready, actually, because, there are more fires who are coming here as well, but.
Join the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions and let's do this together. And we'll be stronger with partners like Mina and friends.
And they can reach you on the website, right?
Yes, faithforclimate.org. And we would love to work with you.
All right, there you heard it. Thank you, all of you, for joining us tonight. We're out of time. It was a very interesting episode. And as we've all heard, it's really important that we all get much more in tune with what's to come and be ready and not so scared and sort of really get our minds in the right place as well. Thank you so much for watching. And we do invite you, you heard it about the Faith Alliance. You can actually check it out and go there and get some more information and get involved, whatever you do. But that's the most important point. Have a good night.